Hello and welcome to this Supernatural episode of Superhero Ethics. Today we're talking about the show Supernatural. Because, a 15-season show we can easily talk about in one 60 to 90-minute episode. But now that we've had the last season of it, we're going to be talking about the last season, about how different characters were handled, about how different romances or non-romances were handled, about found family. All that with two great Supernatural super fans, Ashley Coffin, who you've heard a lot on this and other ones recently, and turning from his semi-retirement as a former host, our special guest today as well, Jacob Milicic. All that and more after this commercial break, over which we have no control. Welcome back. I'm Matthew. I'm your host. As I said, I'm joined today by two great guests. First of all, someone who's been a regular on the podcast recently, as well as a lot of other things on Stranded Panda. Ashley, I know I've been hearing about your love for many aspects of Supernatural for quite some time. I'm super excited to have you here to talk about it.
Oh, thanks for having me. I was waiting. I was like, it's over. Can we talk? Can we talk about it now? Can we talk about it now?
Definitely. And joining me as well is the person who first got that supernatural needle into my arm. He and I recorded an episode about it a while ago when I watched the first couple of seasons during his run as my co-host for here on Superhero Ethics, and that's Jacob Milicic. Jacob, also, I knew when Ashley suggested we talk about Supernatural, I knew I want to do this, but I need to get Jacob back as well.
It is one of the rare occasions in our friendship where I was really strongly pushing for you to watch something. And so it is near and dear to my heart, clearly, because I felt strongly enough to do that.
Yep. Given that the last thing you had pushed me towards was Avatar, I was definitely going to give you a large benefit of the doubt for this one. And I didn't like it quite as much as Avatar, but I certainly enjoyed what I watched. And I have not seen his last seasons, but I know both of you have, and I've certainly been reading a lot about it and seen some important scenes. So a lot of me is just going to be me asking you two questions and stepping back, but I'm mostly just excited to hear you talk about it because I know there's obviously so much discussion about just how important the show was to so many people, and both the good and the bad about how people felt about this last season.
Yeah, it's almost hard to think of where to start. That's why I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm thankful for you. Keep us on track here.
For sure. Well, so let me just start there. I mean, this is kind of a good time for retrospective. We've just finished the show, 15-season run, pretty damn impressive. What are your kind of general thoughts about the show now? Now that the whole thing has come to an end, and we can talk about the whole thing as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I loved how many different twists and turns, you went, how many different characters. It's kind of hard to say it didn't end in a way that I kind of wanted to end after such a long journey, but I liked it. I was happy-ish.
Generally, and I've said this when I've talked about the show on the podcast before, one of the things I really appreciate about Supernatural is the relationships between the characters, the sort of examples of, with many caveats, positive male-male relationship, positive male-male friendship in many ways, in most of them non-toxic, but some of them toxic, unfortunately. Yeah. But also just the journey of these characters who begin their lifetime on television in an almost adversarial relationship, with that classic, quote, brotherly conflict thing, and then come to just this realization that they kind of need each other, and there's this really beautiful interconnectivity between the anchors of the show, and as they expand their found family, I wouldn't have stuck with it for 15 seasons if there wasn't something there to appreciate. It had its bumps. If it had ended after season 5, I think it was, it probably would have been fine. I think that's when it was supposed to originally end. Instead, it went 3 times as long. And there were some bumps along the way.
Yeah,
it struggled to find its footing for a bit, but...
Well, and so that's kind of a good question, and thinking back on it. Did it earn all 15 seasons? Do you think, looking back on it now, was it worth it for the show to go this long? Or do you think it would have been better had it ended after maybe season 5 or season 10 or 12 or whatever it would be?
I don't think it needed all 15 seasons.
Yeah.
I don't think it needed all 15 seasons. It would have been a much tighter show if it had just ended after Sam went over with their half brother. That whole scene, that could have been the button on the show. Would have been a nice, tight, clean finish. I don't think it's bad to have gone the 15 seasons that it has. I don't think it ended up in a worse place. But if you're looking at a quality density, I have to agree that it did not need all 15 seasons, and it ended up spreading your layer of good television really thin.
Yeah, they had a couple seasons there where it just took like an extremely left turn to like, it's fan service, I think, in a not the best way. Just the jokes, and it's just slapstick, and it's like, the first couple seasons of this, especially season 1 and 2, some of the episodes were even, might I say, scary. Like, they had this awesome idea, urban legends, these two brothers who, were at odds with each other, trying to find their dad. Everything really made sense. And then, you get to like season 7 and they just, I don't know. You could tell there was a writer's strike in there somewhere. Like, things went really sideways, and I don't feel like the show ever made it back from that. I continued to watch it, and I really enjoyed it, but it never had the same feeling or writing as like seasons 1 through 4.
I forget. I think this person was specifically talking about Batman, but there is this idea that as something goes longer, camp is inevitable, right? You can't escape it. And it is true that later seasons Supernatural had more campiness. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I didn't, for the most part, enjoy the hell out of Scooby Natural.
Well, Scooby
Natural was delightful, but it was incredibly campy, and you couldn't do that in season 1 or 2. The tone is such a big shift from that, and you make a great point, Ashley, that the original focus around these urban legends, that was what really drew me in, because I'm a big horror nerd and a big mysticism, Gnosticism nerd and stuff. And so even when angels were brought in, and it turns out they were actually jerks, like, that pushed my buttons too. It was
we can really get into that later, because I have a huge
yeah.
For me, like, I watched the first 4 seasons and then stayed up to date with a lot of the rest of it. I'm like you both. I love the theology of it. I love listening to ideas about like angels being jerks and like different versions of the struggle between angels and demons and devils, and how does humanity play into it. I also really like that the getting into this idea that much of our sort of folklore is based in a reality that then gets like translated down, and I thought they did great stuff with that. A lot of it reminded me of the X-Files episodes that I've seen. I haven't seen the whole show, but I've seen a lot of the X-Files. But that same idea of, a pair of two people who have very different interpretations of things, and they're often squabbling, but they make a good team. Each episode going to a new town and dealing with a new, like, is this folklore, is this reality kind of a situation. And it really gave me those X-Files vibes in the first couple seasons, and I loved that.
Yeah. Oh, they did like, Bloody Mary and the Scarecrow and the Lady in White, like that. That was, and I almost wish that they would have gotten back into that a little bit more towards the later seasons. Just things got so crazy that they would pepper in every once in a while, like, oh, we're going to go on a hunt. We're going to do this. And it just felt so out of place.
Yeah.
And at one point they shifted, and you could tell, I feel like, from this one moment in an episode where rather than making the raw head and bloody bones central to the plot, it's a throwaway line in an early part of the episode that, if you understand the term raw head, then you're like, oh, cool. And then that was just the cold open to a completely different story. But in an earlier season Supernatural, that would have been the story, because it was a retelling of old folklore.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, I certainly remember you were talking before about like the campiness, and I want to comment on that in a second. But I think another thing about when a show goes that long, and Supernatural is not the only one, to be sure, it can become very self-referential in a way that is, I think, in some ways very fan servicey and very honoring to those people who've stuck through the whole thing. Mm-hmm. But I certainly know a lot of people who, eventually were like, okay, I've heard all the hype, I want to check this out. And so they watched the first 3 episodes of season 9 or 11 or 13, I mean, or an even number, 12, whatever it is, and just had no idea what was going on. Because by that point, like, the weight of everything that's happened and their their willingness to go into fan service of that and the continuity of it, which can be great, just means that now it becomes a lot less accessible for someone who wants to start but maybe not go all the way back to the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And I felt a little, because I feel watching it from the beginning, I felt a little bit betrayed when it just seems like it got really lazy. And, I know some of my girlfriends have gone to their like supernatural cons, and they're just, I've seen the videos. The people are going crazy. They're spending $500 to get pictures with them. And I feel like somewhere around there, things and the writing and stuff just kind of went a little too far. They started to reel it back in. Like, I think when they started to introduce Rowena and stuff, like the story started to get a lot better. But that, middle part where, if, they're singing or they're doing something that people are going to pay money to see them do, that's when I started to be like, hey man, I want to go to one of these cons so I can go look you in the face and be like, what are you doing? What are you doing? I spent all this money to get kicked out to tell you that I don't like what you're doing. Come back to the story. Come back to the story.
Ladies and gentlemen, fandom in Philadelphia. It sounds very accurate.
So in general, if it had not gone as long as it had, then I don't think you would have had that time for that middle period that I think Ashley are very correctly criticizing for sort of leaning too heavily into the fandom. Although, something we're going to talk about later is they didn't always, treat fan desires or pitches of ideas well or seriously.
Right. And we'll definitely get into that in just a bit. I think the other comment is that it's interesting hearing us talk about that, because certainly in the other fandoms that I know all three of us have shared and talked about, those kind of conferences, the cons you're talking about are, there's Comic Con and there's been Star Trek cons for 30 years and all sorts of these kind of things. And it's interesting because in a lot of those, we often talk about wishing there was a lot more fan service in the shows. All these things in the Marvel Netflix universe that we wished they had done, to help tie things in the way the fans really wanted to see. And I've been one of the loudest voices for those. And I still do think, like, with the MCU especially, I wish there was some more of those kind of things. But I think it's interesting to have Supernatural as kind of the counterexample of here's what happens when the writing becomes so fan servicey that it kind of loses here's the thing that you originally loved, and now it's just I'm not saying it's that extreme, but that if these middle seasons it was kind of much more on the self-referential stuff, the campy stuff, and not actually what everyone had started to love from the beginning.
Yeah. I think a lot of it had to do when they got to the seasons where they found out that they were just a story book or and you're like, well, what? Do you think that they had the ending planned out for Chuck when they were doing that?
Absolutely not.
Okay,
there are some things when you go back and when you go back and watch those episodes, which I did after fan fiction, when we were supposed to walk away from the ending of fan fiction, understanding that Chuck was God, which I did not. I went back.
Just for those of us who have either not seen it or for those in the audience who maybe saw it but don't have the crystal clear memory of it, can you give just a 20-second explanation of what you're talking about there?
Sure. So there's I want to say season 6, 7, they find out that their story is being written down in actual books that are paperbacks and are getting sold to people, and they read them, and there's fan conventions and whatnot, and they're written by this person, Chuck, who is supposedly, they learn later, a prophet of the Lord, and that's why this is the gospel of the Winchesters, quote unquote.
Oh boy.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, okay, sure, fine, that's very self-aggrandizing, but there's a later season episode where there is a group of high school students that are making a musical of their story, and
dear Lord,
and at the end of the season or in the episode, Chuck, this writer who was supposedly a prophet and definitely on screen died, we saw that happen, shows up and gives a comment. And this is supposedly when we're supposed to learn, and we get massively confirmed later, that Chuck that whole time was not a prophet of the Lord. He was the Lord.
Yeah.
And has been sort of writing and dictating their story, trying to get them toward his masterpiece conclusion.
Yeah.
Dear Lord.
Right?
And it's with the that stuff, I liked it, and I thought it would have worked so much better if God only kind of booped in and out, like when it mattered once in a while. Just like, oh no, oh God saved them, yay. Like it did once or twice. But when you actually bring a character and go, this is God into the story, you have problems, and you better be an amazing writer, because it's like the Superman thing. Like it's God now. It's God.
Right.
Well, especially because, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but my memory of the seasons that I did watch, and certainly of now what you're all talking about, it seems like the show is, without meaning to make a religious statement by any means, but seems to be very clearly saying the Christian, or at least our modern day understanding of the monotheistic Christian understanding of the universe and cosmology and all that kind of stuff is correct.
Yeah.
Like it's very much like this version of God, of angels and all that, like this is the truth.
Well,
is that a fair statement?
Not veritas, not truth, because other gods exist. Old gods exist. They
like
encounter
Loki.
them. Right. Well, Loki, as it turns out, is actually the Archangel Gabriel. So that they reigned
that went
back
left. Yeah. Thank you. I forgot about that amazing twist.
No, I did too. And then we find out. No, actually, excuse me, you're wrong. Because in a later episode, we find out that Gabriel just stole Loki's visage, and Loki was a thing. Right.
Okay.
God,
what a show. On itself.
If you did it the first, if you had done it the first one, I think I would have seen a lot more outrage from my Norse pagan friends being like, what?
It took them like 5 seasons or something to make that quote correction unquote. And they do like an Ocean's 11 style heist episode that features Loki and Gabriel and actual Loki. Anyway, that's a digression. I wouldn't say that it's saying this is truth, because it's the portrayal of God and the angels and the whole dichotomy of God and Lucifer and heaven and hell doesn't really play out like my understanding, at least, of what I grew up with for that religion. It's sort of a play on it, but it does explicitly say that God is the creator, right? And so any religion that says otherwise about who created the universe or whatnot, the show does say, nope, this is him, this is his art.
Right. That also to me leads to another point that I know we're going to talk about in a bit, but it's just about this idea of determinism versus free will, because I always think anytime a show introduces the idea of supernatural forces, forgive the pun, but that are kind of like moving the pieces, as moving our characters as chess pieces on a board, you start asking, well, is this all just a story we're watching that someone else has written, or do our characters actually have some agency and determination?
I mean, spoiler, it is all a story that we're watching somebody else has written. It's a fourth wall idea, but yeah.
Well, also always true, also true. So let's talk about that final season. First of all, just in terms of how do you think this final season did of wrapping things up? Did it feel like there were still some major inconsistencies or things that, and we're going to talk about the romance in a moment, but first just kind of on some of the other general stuff of the story points, did it feel like there were huge plot holes left, or that most things had gotten kind of tied up and resolved? What did you kind of think of the final season as the coda to this whole show?
I feel like they resolved what needed to be resolved, maybe in a little bit too easily of a way. I mean, we did lose a lot of major characters. And I'll be honest, the having to take that break in the middle has kind of messed up my memory a little bit of the first half. The Rowena stuff, that was all this season, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Rowena became the Queen of Hell this season.
Yeah, which is awesome.
Love that ending for her.
The first half of this season I thought was going in a really good direction, and then the second half just seemed like they tied everything up with a bow pretty quickly.
Right. Generally, I agree with that. Ashley, they had a bunch of sort of loose or semi-loose threads, and I think for the most part they sewed them all up. Part of it did seem like they didn't really have, to me, a good plan for what that would look like until they started writing the 15th season. And they took on a very ambitious plot arc for their last one, and I do think it fell a little bit short, but it's I don't know how else you like. I don't think you can write that particular villain perfectly.
God.
Yeah, that one. I think that's
okay. God as villain seems like an interesting plot choice.
He is God is the main villain in the last season.
Yep, 100%.
They have to create a sister for him last season so that there might be somebody who could, take him down or out, and they never really used that.
Instead, he ends up convincing and manipulating her to join with him in the final season, which is not great, but...
I mean, just in terms of theology, and it's funny how many shows take this for granted, even though they're not by any means like Christian. But the idea of God as he is very much a Abrahamic monotheistic concept that does not apply in many other traditions, certainly not in many even modern understandings of Christianity, Judaism, or Islam. But so that even that alone is a very interesting theological choice that they probably were not thinking of. This. They're probably more thinking of in terms of like, well, cool, this is a language people use, and getting an actor who's very clearly one gender is going to be. If they didn't, would open a whole other can of worms.
I agree with that,
could have
and
been great ways, but it's just a very interesting choice in that regard. Ashley, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I want to talk about that when we talk about the Castiel stuff with the romance with the angels and stuff, because I agree a lot with that, and what like omnipotent beings, are male, female, gay, straight, like that, they fall into their own different kind of category with that, and I think it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. That definitely makes sense. That makes sense.
Getting back to how things were wrapped up, though, I feel like the ending itself could have been... It could have been different. They could have made a different choice. They could have gone with the fight goes on ending, and I think it was actually kind of brave of them to decide to actually put a button on it and end it and end the story of the Winchesters. And as a fan of the show, I appreciate them making that choice, because if you're going to end something, you should give it an ending.
Yeah.
And I also really enjoyed the difference in how each of the Winchester brothers went out, because it lined up with their story and their characters, even if it wasn't... Yeah, well, you could have an argument for whether it was believable given everything that had happened up to that point. But
let's give a quick summary. It's that Dean dies while still fighting, and Sam gets to live on and have a family, and his child becomes a hunter?
Kind of. It was more along the lines of like they had their ride out into the sunset in the episode before the last one, and then in the last episode it's just a whatever case, like a nothing run of the mill case, and Dean gets killed. He gets pushed up against the wall where there's a metal peg, and you're just like, oh come on, they showed the peg right before it happened. You're like, please don't do this, because even though it was very dramatic and it was like, okay, that does make sense, like it would be the way that they would go out just on any random day. But it doesn't, though. It just doesn't, because there's a million ways that Sam could bring him back, or, where's all the people? Where's Jack? Where's Cass? Since we know that Cass isn't in the Black Void anymore, that he's building heaven. We find out at the end with Jack, and I don't know, I guess. But it was also this the time, so I do also think it was okay I feel so confused. I digress.
Yeah. It's a conflicting thing. I think one of the things that helps me with it is that we know Chuck is gone, and we know that Chuck wanting his particular end for the Winchesters was a driving force behind why they keep coming back. And Dean explicitly saying, no. I know this was the time I was completely free. This was my choice. Don't you dare bring me back, Sam. Yeah. This is how it should end for me. I thought was a good button. But given it is a tougher pill to swallow because of how many times they've had a situation exactly like that, and whichever brother didn't die bends literal heaven and earth to bring the other one back. And this one time we're meant to believe that nope, that isn't what happens. And if you accept that the reason why that kept happening was in some small part, not entirely, but in some small part due to Chuck's influence, Chuck being gone makes that scene work.
I can definitely understand that, especially from the perspective of often in these kind of shows, part of what we're supposed to understand is that in every fight, like, our heroes are not invulnerable. There's always that chance that, you know, the numbers are going to catch up with them, and that even if they have like a 99% chance of winning every fight, there's always that chance that that one bad guy is going to get in that one lucky blow, and they're not going to get the big glorious death against the big bad in the final episode. They're just going to die randomly. And forgive me, there's a Buffy spoiler I'm about to do for the last season of Buffy, so skip ahead if you don't want to hear that in about a minute. One of my favorite things in the show Buffy the Vampire Slayer is that one of the characters, Anya, in one of the final battles dies. But not in this, like, often what will happen is, like, that character will make a glorious stand, or they'll make, like, the perfect speech right before, or for example, Quicksilver dying in Age of Ultron to save Hawkeye as the payoff to this thing about, you know, I didn't see that coming that they've built up for so long. Like, that's often how these things happen. And Anya just died randomly because one of 1,000, you know, bad guys got in a lucky hit. And I kind of love the idea that that's how Dane would die, because he's just always going into danger, and one time the numbers catch up to him. But I can also understand how you're right, that, like, if the show has established that that will never actually happen because we can always save someone from it, to have this happen this one time, if it's not the Chuck thing, does seem kind of off. But I do like at least that they did that, of, like, you're not always going to die in the big glorious moment.
They tricked me because I really thought it was going to just be regular people. Like, they kind of set it up to just look like murderers. And I think they'd only done that once before. And I almost would have accepted that a little bit more than this, because that would have been, but I think that would have been a little bit too heartbreaking for the fans. I would have liked it because I'm a monster, but I thought that would have been better.
I thought it was too. And I agree with you 100%, Ashley. I think it would have been more impactful if it was just people that ended up being Dean's undoing and not vampires, which is what it was. Vampires were introduced in season 1 as this, you know, way out of their league monster that, like, they were going to have a really hard time taking care of. They needed Dad to help with that. But at this point in the show, they've offed some absurd number of vampires, right? It's just some incomprehensible number of vampires that probably outweighs the number of characters that have names.
Look, when you're level 1, the level 5 vampire seems pretty bad. But once you've taken on the level 50 deity, you know, then the
just chopping
heads. Let me ask this then. So we get to the big finale, the last big battle is resolved, but the fight is still going on. You know, they're still fighting vampires or whatever it is. So my question is, what is the Winchester's legacy? Did they fundamentally change the aspect of because I would have thought that the show ends with them sort of conquering evil, or, you know, so there's no more monsters going forward or something. Clearly that didn't happen. No. Do you think that the end of the show is that they did, though, make some fundamental difference? Well, or is it more that just that there's always a huge threat and the Winchesters stopped those threats for 15 years, but now there's going to keep being more threats as always, and someone else is going to have to stop them instead?
They went with their storyline as Chuck/God was destroying the entire universe, and then the planet was going to be the last thing. He was undoing everything and starting over. So technically what they did was save Earth, I guess, or this universe, because he had already undone all of them. So, and then now Jack is God.
Right.
So
now their adoptive Nephilim son, Jack, has absorbed God's power and become God.
As you do.
And his plan is to be completely hands off. But he did fix heaven, because heaven was weird and honestly felt a little bit like a different form of hell to me.
Yeah. Him and Cass fixed it, though. They threw up some, new curtains and some throw rugs, had all the girls over for tea. It's great now.
Made a big amount of road so that Dean could have his driving moment, his moment of being free
Kansas
and also
on
dead.
24/7.
Oh, yeah. Just carry on Wayward Son the whole time.
I'm going to look into copyright rules, because I really want to use like a 10% clip of a 10-second clip of Wayward Son as the intro music or outro music for this. I think that means I might get sued into oblivion, so we'll see.
We can't even sing it, I think, which is like...
Yeah.
Be a rebel. Do it.
So I guess what I'm hearing from you is then it seems like that the attitude of the show is there was evil in the world and monsters long before the Winchesters came along, but that it got kind of turned up to 11. And instead of it just being the garden variety, some people get snatched and there's kind of a balance, that the destructive forces became much stronger and there was a real attempt to unbalance everything and wipe everything out. And what the Winchesters did was, their legacy is that they restored the balance. And there's still vampires, there's still ghosts and goblins and ladies in white and all that, but that they at least stopped that one moment of could have everything been destroyed. Is that kind of a more accurate summary of it then?
Mm-hmm.
They averted multiple apocalypse or apocalyptes or however you pluralize that word. If this show was written by Joss Whedon, they would have had a pair of gravestones that said underneath their names, "They saved the world a lot."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because they did.
Yeah.
But it's never the case, and that was something I was concerned about, actually, is that after beating literal God, after they've had their JRPG ending, the world was going to be, all fixed and all better, and when Jack brought everyone back, he would only bring back, the, quote, humans, as if humans are, like, completely pure and not without problems, and not bring any of the monsters. But that didn't happen. And that's actually something I find very interesting and compelling about Jack's character in that instance, is that he had a choice when he was bringing back the sentient beings, right, to only bring back the, quote, good ones, unquote. He doesn't make that choice. He doesn't make that unilateral decision of who deserves to exist and who doesn't. He's just like, no, I'm just going to undo the eraser. Which is a very sort of even-handed approach to being the supreme being.
Right. So let's now talk about the issue that has been all over social media about this. And I know there's a lot of strong feelings of. People have been wanting, and I think there's been a whole bunch of discussion about how much the show was pointing towards the idea of the love between Castiel and Dean. And we obviously have a step towards that in some way, but in ways that a lot of fans found really frustrating and hurtful in some ways, and other fans maybe did not see it that way. But Jacob, I know this is an issue you've been talking about a lot, so why don't you kind of start us off? Tell us about how the Deaniel or Castadine, what's the
Destiel.
Destiel, thank you. Tell us about the Destiel of this last season and some of your feelings about it.
So, for those who are unaware, who I guess have just been under a rock for any of the news articles or not wanting to read it, but wanting to listen to this episode, in the last season, we have the character of Castiel, who's the angel of Thursdays, who raised Dean up from hell 18 seasons ago, and has been building a really strong relationship with both of the brothers, but with Dean specifically, the relationship getting stronger and stronger and more dependent on each other. There's a moment where death is coming to kill Dean, to reap Dean. And Castiel has this scene where he confesses his love for Dean right before going to what I could best describe as super hell.
Okay.
Like it's worse than hell.
Right. It's
the place in canon. It's the place where created beings, quote unquote, as if not every being is created, right? But like where beings like angels and demons go when they die.
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
Is in the conceit of the fiction. That's where the empty is. They go to this sort of nothingness. And that 1-2 punch of homosexual character confesses their love and then gets ripped away immediately is very, very damaging. And I when I saw it happen, I could not believe that the show writers would jump willingly into that trope, knowing full well, like, this is not something that people have been burying. This is or burying the lead on or what have you. This is very in your face these days, I feel. And rightly so, this is a trope you should avoid.
Right. And just to be clear, the trope you're talking about is the bury the gays.
Bury your gays trope. Yeah.
Which I think we've talked about somewhat on this podcast. We've not gone into it as much as I've wanted to. But it's basically this idea of, for a long time in fiction, especially TV and movies, like we started to see gay characters emerge and LGBTQI characters emerge, but they would almost always die tragically. And part of that was a lot of this started during the heyday of HIV/AIDS, and so you almost always had gay characters with that disease, or it was, there would be true love and someone would get murdered in a gay bashing, or there'd always be some kind of a tragic ending. And in the same way that, you can have, a character of any background be any background, except that when that always is what happens, there's a real desire to not have it. Like, we've seen enough black actors play drug dealers. Can we have something else? We've seen enough Asian characters be the super smart techie guy. Can we have something else? And I think that for that same reason, there's a real sense of like, sure, a homosexual character sacrificing themselves for love is a thing that could happen sometimes. But when we've seen it so often, and there isn't other gay characters in the thing that do get to live happily ever after, it's seen as just really hurtful and offensive and problematic. And so I wanted to kind of give that context to the listeners who aren't fully up to date.
That last point is really, I think, the sticking point. Is there the problem is even in today's media, we don't see enough of characters in homosexual relationships just being stable and happy. They invariably end up at a bad end, and there's this idea that it's being written that way because we're trying to tell people that, hey, you're choosing a life of sadness and tragedy if you go this way, and that sucks. That is incredibly damaging.
And I think often the thought is that, like,
false.
At this point, it's subtle enough that the writers aren't necessarily thinking that themselves. It's just that they're playing into that idea because it happens over and over and over again.
Agree. I do think that it's incumbent on someone in a creative industry to be aware and analyze one's own work for it.
100%.
Right. So I don't think they get a pass, but in a vacuum, right? I think the story of we've seen this in many forms of media with heterosexual relationships, where somebody confesses their love for someone, sacrifices themselves for that person. It's unfortunate that it had to happen with a love interest or somebody who's interested in one of our lead characters, and has been part of the mainstay cast for so long, and it's that moment's when he goes away. I'm pretty sure, Ashley, you mentioned earlier that he does come back from the empty, we are told, and helps Jack rebuild heaven to make it better, to put the tapestries in the right place or whatever the hell. Mm-hmm. But we don't see him. And part of that is out of their control. But I feel like maybe it would have been worth waiting so that we would have a reunion in heaven between Dean and Castiel. The reasoning being, as I understand it, the last 2 episodes were filmed with a very limited cast and crew due to the current circumstances, due to the coronavirus pandemic. And some people are probably tired of hearing about it, but hey, it still exists. So
wear your mask.
Yeah.
Yep, wear your mask.
No, that makes a lot of sense about how that could affect things.
Ashley, I've been talking for quite some time. What is your take on this? I'm curious your thoughts.
It's not that I'm avoiding.
Sure.
Okay. I just feel like if they were going to put that in the story and make it something that prominent, that wasn't the time to do it, because someone like me who's never seen Dean Winchester, in any, to me, I've never seen him act, bi or that way. And whereas Angels, and this is the 6th time Castiel has died while telling one of the Winchesters that he loves them. Like, I don't know. It wasn't anything new for me, so I didn't think to look into it more. And I don't not exaggerating. I think he's died 6 times.
He has. He 100% has. Yeah. One time was when he was trying to be God, to be fair.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll X that one out. But a lot of the times it was, some form of sacrifice, just like every one of these characters kind of have, which is also like when the Dean thing happened, I'm like, okay, when's someone going to come get him? Hello? When is someone? Oh, wow, right. They're not. And I felt like that happened with Castiel, and I thought that their choices to kill off certain characters and never bring them back again, like they did with Crowley. We hardly see Rowena again. And the last people, they didn't even bring the parents back at the end. They had Bobby there at the Roadhouse, and I thought that was really beautiful, because this is, Dean and Sam's heaven with everybody else who this is heaven for too. And for Castiel, I didn't think that it would have been right for him to be there because it's not his heaven, maybe. There's, Jack, he loved being almost, a father figure to Jack. And I feel like if it came between Dean and Sam and Jack, a couple times he showed us he would pick Jack.
Right. No, that is true. That is established in the fiction. And so I don't disagree actually with anything you're saying. I think the reasoning behind, and this is, I can only speak to my own reaction, but the reason why I reacted more strongly to this specific instance of Cass telling one of the Winchesters he loved them and then getting yanked off into whatever fresh death he's getting, is we knew this was going to be the last one. Right? We know going in, this is the last season, he's probably not doing this again. So this is the, this is the make it count moment. And unfortunately, that particular scene felt to me much more like a confession of actual romantic love from Castiel to Dean, whether it's requited or not. And we could talk about Dean's specific sexuality and probably argue about it. I think that there's some cases to be made because of Benny, because of Crowley. There are other characters he's been involved with that it would be subtext because they don't show male-male romantic relationships on screen in that show for whatever reason. Other than once, there was that one episode, I don't want to erase it, where it was a pair of people cosplaying as the Winchester brothers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they were involved.
Not gross, but there's some fanfic out there that's just, there's tasteful fanfic, and then there's, furries fanfic. But I'm not kink shaming.
Well, there's nothing explicitly wrong with being furry, but
no.
I do think Wincest crosses a social
brother,
moral
sister.
line.
Brother.
Yeah. There is fade to
brother,
black
sister.
Yeah, all fanfic is legit. I think we're just saying there's some that crosses certain lines with the brothers and the like. And well, let me say this. I want to get back to the Castiel part of it because I think it's important context there. But first, I want to just say, Ashley, did you have any response in terms of the idea of Dean possibly being bi? Because I know my impression is that's not how you saw it, to be sure.
No, and you know what? I actually reached out to a couple people to be like, have I just been too straight to ever see this? Has anybody seen this before? And a lot of people were, adamantly no, borderline misogyny sometimes with Dean, if you look back into the earlier seasons. So I was just trying to rake my brain, and that's why I'd be super interested to hear what examples, what do you remember that I'm not remembering?
And it's sort of a change in his characterization, because you were absolutely right. Early on, Dean is very much a hound, and in a lot of very toxic, very damaging ways. He has this hyper masculinity.
And to be clear, that is by no means mutually exclusive with being bi or queer in some way. I mean, often those two things can be very linked.
Right.
As a character's figuring out that about themselves. But yeah, go on.
And where I'm going is that as the show progresses, when we get to the later seasons, he has these clearly very, very deep emotional connections with Crowley and with the vampire Benny from Purgatory. And the way he responds to them, and to Cass, admittedly, it's difficult for me to describe, but there's a level of intensity to his emotion and the character's expression that I feel could very reasonably be interpreted as emotional ties beyond mere friendship. I'm not saying declaratively that is the case, but I do think it is possible to read Dean as bisexual.
Right, and I think with this also, well, actually, let me cut that off in case Cassie, you wanted to respond to that.
No, I agree. I mean, it's what people get from art and see different things in. Nobody's ever wrong, Maybe because I'm a straight, white female who it was, completely captivated by these two men, I wouldn't even be looking for that. You know what I mean? Because I wouldn't want to see it. Not that I wouldn't want to see it, but you know what I mean? I'm just that, I'm going to sound like a 12-year-old, but hot guy. Oh my God, I want to marry him. We're going to have kids. We're going to all be hunters,
Right. No, I get it.
You had a decided interest in his interest in women, which is legitimate as well.
And bisexual doesn't remove his interest in women. It reaffirms his interest in women.
Right. I just never saw it for that. I would even say Sam maybe over Dean, but I think that I always saw Dean as that tortured soul. Like someone like myself, I don't have a lot of family. I never met my father, and I don't, stuff like that. But you feel certain ways about your friendships that people who have family can't understand. Like those, you meet people along your journey who become your new family, and it is a love over a friendship. It doesn't mean it's romantic, doesn't mean it's not romantic, but it is a higher level of just friendship because you have a stronger need to not, lose these people. You want to protect these people.
And that I agree with. It is also a completely reasonable interpretation that Dean just feels strongly for people that he makes connections with, because as soon as you enter the family slot in Dean's brain, and this is something I think is wonderful about both of the Winchesters. Once you're family, they you don't have to be blood related. They go, okay, no, you have now ascended to the level of family, and now it's the same. We're going to move heaven or earth. Everything we feel is at the highest level of intensity. We love you as people. And so it is also completely possible that these relationships that I am seeing potential romantic interest in are just Dean thought of Crowley as family, Dean thought of Benny as family, Dean thinks of Cass as family, that kind of thing.
And I think I really want us to go further on this idea of the found family, and we're definitely going to go there in a second. But I wanted to pull us back to the Dean Castiel and switch it from talking about Dean to Castiel, because actually I hear what you're saying about it felt like this was the same confession of love he's made before. I think it's really interesting because the actor, Misha Collins, has very specifically said, that, and I think I'm quoting here, that in his understanding was that was a declaration of homosexual love, that was the words he was using. That this was a romantic sexual love, not just the kind of brotherly bro love, which I'm not using that in any bad way. I'm all for more expressions of male-male love that are not romantic, but that I think there definitely was as he understood it, a romantic declaration there. I think what this gets into, which is the other big part about why this is also problematic, is not just the bury your gays trope, but the queer baiting trope. Yeah. And again, for those who don't know that term, what we mean there is that a lot of times it seems that shows will have a lot of fun planting, like you said, Ashley, people can see anything they want to see, and then often we can have different interpretations, and that's great. But that there's something that happens a lot where a show will very clearly give you all the sort of steps you need to take you to the conclusion that a character is queer, or a character is trans, or something like that, but never quite cross the line of being explicit, so that the people who don't want to see it, or who would be offended by it, or call boycotts or whatever because they are homophobic, they never quite cross that line. And that this can often be really problematic because you're giving us hope and taking it away, and you're acting like the thing that we're looking for is illegitimate or not as okay as something else. And I think the fact that even now, when the actor is specifically saying, clearly this was meant to be my saying, I am in love with you, Dean, but that some fans may not have seen that, is to me, again, one more time, where the show is saying, we're gonna let people who want to have that have it, but we're not gonna make it explicit.
I do have a little something to say about that. I went and I looked up what his exact words were, and it seemed like he had posted on Twitter first defending the end and saying that he was upset that people, weren't happy with the end, and then people kind of came for him for it. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until the apology tweet that he was like, and I do believe that it was romantic, but as the actor, I kind of need the writers to come out and tell me that that's what they were doing. Because the actor... Go ahead.
No. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Continue.
No, it's okay. Because I definitely can see how the actor could interpret that, but he wasn't saying it right away. And then kind of it's that whole, you get in trouble on Twitter and you have to.
Just for context, my understanding is that that's not actually correct. That the first time he said it was in a panel that happened right after my understanding is that he said it first in a panel discussion that happened soon after. He then posted something talking about why he felt that it wasn't a bury your gays moment, and that's what he later then was apologizing for because people pointed out to him why it was hurtful. Now, you may be right as well, but my understanding is that the details lined up a little bit differently there.
That is my understanding as well. There was a Zoom panel type thing that they did. That's where Misha you vocally said that there was a confession of homosexual love, talking about that story moment with his character, got into this thing on Twitter. So I think that is the correct chronology, but I haven't been, I gotta confess, I haven't been following it very closely, because, and this is something this is what I was reacting to actually, is that I also would love the writers to come out and say, yeah, that's what we intended. I think they won't, for the same reasons we've had piles of documented cases of queer baiting in Supernatural with nothing really to show for it other than Charlie, and Charlie even got her love interest erased unceremoniously in the last season. Like, if you could point to something in the show where they didn't do this, maybe, but like even like first Charlie got super murdered.
Brutal.
Right?
Yeah, that was brutal.
Just really, really nasty and not good. And then second Charlie from Alternate Universe, like, had a relationship with Dorothy, right? From Wizard of Oz.
That was a weird episode too.
Yep, that was...
Right.
I have thoughts about that, but the relationship was good. The episode... Anyway. But, you know... No single... They had two chances, because they gave us two Charlies to not have that happen, and it sucks. If they had any track record to show for, no, we do allow homosexual characters to have happy endings and treat them as equally important, but they don't, and so they can't really... It's hard to defend saying, well, you know, we're not playing into the trope, because we didn't know about it or whatever. It's not like people haven't been calling them out on it for years.
Yeah.
Right. And as we've seen through other things, it's very clear that they are very aware of what the fan community is saying and doing, and often responding to that in other ways, which I think... Because I think in some shows you can say, look, we as writers are just never going on Twitter. We're not in any way interacting with what the fans are saying. We're just writing the show we want to write. It seems very clear that in Supernatural that that's not the case by any means.
And I forget where I read this, but I did read somewhere that, and this may be apocryphal, but I thought I had read somewhere that Misha Collins was on board for that relationship to happen in canon, and Jensen Ackles didn't think it was consistent with Dean's character. And again, that might be completely apocryphal. Something put that idea in my head that these actors had both said these things. But I went and tried to find it this morning to do my homework before the podcast, and I couldn't find it. So I don't know if I'm making that up or not, but it's certainly true that if you're going to have a hard time portraying something if both actors aren't on board with it, right?
Yeah. I also kind of agree with him though, because I mean he knows that character, and he doesn't seem like someone who would shy away from doing something like that. Though I haven't really check to see if he's ever been gay in anything else, but I feel like if they called up for it for the boys, that show can get a little crazy, and I'm interested to see what he's going to do in a different role. But I have to agree, like for the Dean Winchester that I thought that they showed in the show, it wouldn't have made sense for his character. But
I agree to disagree, but I don't think your take is invalid. I have a different interpretation from having watched 15 years of this show as well.
Yeah.
And once you get that long, it's very easy to have divergent ideas about characters as well. Yeah. It's something to do with the show's run. I think Sam Winchester is far more attractive. I think Jared Padalecki is far more attractive than Jensen Ackles.
See,
it was seasons 1 through about 6, and then somewhere Dean started to look like a man's man. I started to like... And Sam got too whiny.
I was such a Gilmore Girls fan, and I hated the character of the actor who plays Sam in this played another character named Dean in that, who was a terrible person, and so I just could never find him attractive.
It's interesting, Gilmore's hangover. Because early season Supernatural, I think Jared looks goofy, and he sort of grew into himself, and I feel like Jensen looks a little rode hard, put away wet later.
See, I feel like in the beginning, Jensen was still acting too much like he was on, like the Dynasty or whatever. Like he acted like somebody from a, what are they called during the day? Soap opera. And I think, even though his his voice and everything's always stayed over exaggerated, which I love about the character. I think he fell into acting a little bit more, while as Jared Padalecki these last few seasons, can you get through a scene without making 15 weird faces? Like, what?
I love Sam's face.
Oh, I can't. I was just like, what happened? I just Dean.
He's very tortured. He's a tortured special boy.
Well,
I mean, that was only cute for a couple seasons.
I think we're now getting a little further away from the ethical discussion about the show. But just to kind of wrap up the thirst part of it, Ashley, you had said that for you there has actually been some kind of like discoveries about yourself and kind of like seeing yourself grow as your attraction to the different characters has changed that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I realized that when I went from liking little boys to men. I mean, 15 years ago, I was 30. I'm 36 now, so I can't math. How old was I when
21.
the show started? Yeah, I was 21. They're about my age, and I was like, yeah, I went, the young, tall guy. But then, Dean, the caretaker, always going to be there, a little, drives the car, has the better music.
Makes sense.
Drinks the good whiskey.
My poor husband has had to deal with this for so long.
Consumes entirely too much cholesterol. His diet's terrible. That's an ethical dilemma.
They never work out yet. He says so fit.
Right.
I mean, you say they never work out, but they do fight with beings with supernatural strength on a fairly regular basis and come out ahead. So
I will say my favorite episodes are when either one of them is a demon and or loses their soul.
Oh yeah,
that's even hotter. Oh. When Sam's just
like
running around banging
reasons,
everybody.
Clearly, but
yeah, I like the villains.
different reason, clearly.
That's why I was so upset when Dean only lost his soul for one episode. They end the season with Dean losing his soul. They go into the next season and they fixed
just
it
immediately.
in the first episode.
Yep. That's unfortunate.
Whereas Sam goes like half a season
without
a soul.
Yeah,
and it's so good.
He's just murdering and banging.
We're just fanning out about the show.
Murdering and banging is also a great T-shirt idea. Actually,
Murdering and banging is my Sex Pistols cover band.
There you go.
Yes.
There you go.
Speaking of the X-Files, in that season they meet their grandfather, and it's Skinner from the X-Files.
Yep.
Oh, cool. Well, that helps us to make what was going to be a very uncomfortable transition from thirst to family. But let's talk about the found family idea.
Have you
let's
met
get
fans of
Game
the show?
Of Thrones up here.
We're staying away from Wincest for the moment. But yeah, in terms of
no.
Obviously the show is very much about blood family to start with, and that it's these two brothers who are both dealing with their very mixed and very difficult situation they have with their father and having different relations to their fathers and their sort of hunt for their mother and all this. But obviously found family, not just blood family, becomes a very important part of the show. Talk a little bit about I can't say words. Talk a little bit about that. What is it about found family in the show that really resonated for you?
I do love their whole, how Bobby kind of becomes their father and they have these other, figures. But I also feel like if you are another character on the show and you're not a Winchester, like one of them, they'll let you die. So they do have, the found family thing. But, I mean, if you really think about all the people who were part of their, their family, besides Bobby, I don't know. Who would you think was a little closer?
Castiel's definitely in the family. Jack obviously becomes family.
I still think
although
they killed him. If he
they had a disagreement between Sam and Dean about whether or not Jack was family, which was, I think, very powerful. I think that Charlie was close to being family, but missed the mark for reasons. Ruth Connell's character, Rowena, I feel like graduated to the level of being family because Sam didn't want to do it. Right, he didn't want to stick the knife in her, but it was one of those things where it was the only way, and it was saving more family at the expense of fewer family, and it was a good moment. I also just really like Rowena as a character, my favorite. But the thing is, the show starts with two brothers who have honestly a pretty toxic father. in a lot of ways, who did a lot of damage to them, who was pretty abusive, but they have this deep love for their physical real father. In the second season, first episode of the second season, their father dies, goes to hell, dies, gone. Right. From that moment on, everyone they form a connection with. Jody, I think, gets included in the family. Obviously, Jody. I can't believe I forgot Jody. And then there was the mother-daughter duo that died in the explosion in that one episode summarily.
Yeah, Joe and... What was the mom's? Joe and...
Oh, yeah. Joe is right. I don't remember.
And they had the cousin that lived in the basement that was hilarious with the mullet.
Yes, it was over 9 seasons ago. I don't know how we're not remembering this.
Yes, just
because we don't really hear about them again, but yeah. We do for like a few episodes afterward, and in the next season they're still sort of agonizing over it. But then they have new, fresh deaths of people they care about to agonize over.
Mm-hmm. Right. And get killed. Like Kevin. Right. And you know who actually survived? Gareth.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a werewolf now.
Weirdly,
but he made it.
Yeah. They're really lanky, nerdy. You could say at the start kind of wannabe hunter friend who actually came into his own. Is a member of the Winchester family. Mm-hmm. I guess you could say that survived. Mm. Anyway, the whole thing is that when they form relationships with characters, there reaches a point where whenever someone clearly, quote unquote, clearly graduates to main character status, right, or similar, it's because they have become adopted by the Winchesters as close to blood as mm-hmm. they can have, and this is something I appreciate it in my media because I think the idea of found family is very important, especially because so many of us at a certain mm-hmm. point in our lives have to move away from our original home where we grew up and start forming new relationships, and like you lose that sort of stable curtain of knowing you've always got your family's always going to be there regardless of what happens. And it's so important to be able to understand that you get to choose people around you that you want to bring that close to your circle and have those kinds of connections with.
For sure.
And mm-hmm. having these fictional characters who, I feel very strongly for, clearly watching them for 15 years, mm-hmm. Make these decisions about these people. And not all of them are perfect people, right? They're not all like, okay, you've done the good thing, you get to stay. A lot of them have problems. A lot of them even sometimes cross the Winchesters. But it's okay because you're family.
And that it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier with like the emotional feelings that, these characters get to have for people when they think, we don't have anybody, we just have each other. But then as it starts to get later, they start trusting. And I think trust was such a big part mm-hmm. of the show because it is, historically not a good, it's not a good job to have people to trust. They got turned on a lot. Yeah. But for them to be able to keep trusting people, I thought was pretty important.
Yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely agree. Especially after their father had set a very bad example, lying to them sometimes, misleading them, quote, for their protection, etc.
Oh, I have something to say about that.
Yeah,
I think a big downside of the show was I felt like with that the characters never learned from it. I feel mm-hmm. like each episode for 15 years had one of them finding, even with Cass, bring him into this circle, one of them finding something out, not telling the other one until 3/4 of the show, them getting over the thing, them sitting down talking about how they need to communicate, and then immediately starting over and doing the same thing in the next episode, and it was constant.
It's their dad set a bad example and they never recovered from it, and it was infuriating to watch. Right? Because every single time you're all like
mad.
You literally said you learned your lesson last time, and you are demonstrably incorrect because you haven't.
I know.
And that's an important theme in the show, too, though, is that every time they do that, they get punished. And so mm-hmm. it's sort of like a hidden, quote-unquote, moral of the show that, being open and having the hard conversations early can save you a lot of grief later. Mm-hmm. and that you might think you're protecting somebody by hiding the truth from them, but it doesn't turn out good in the long run. And time and time again, that is exactly what happens. And I appreciate the lesson, but it is infuriating to watch these characters make the exact same mistake over and over again.
Over and over.
Yeah, I can see that. And I remember, Jacob, when you and I recorded our episode about Supernatural a while ago, that the father story was one that really resonated for me and that I thought was really interesting because we got to see how two different characters who had both had this experience of a very problematic father, who they were both very devoted to, but also really recognizing the abusiveness of, that one of the most interesting things of the story was that the two of them were at very different points in their journey of acceptance with that. And that Sam was still in a place of, Dean was still in a place of, he's our dad, I'm not going to question him, he told us to go on this mission, we're going to do this for Dad. And Sam was much more in a place of like, no, Dad lied to us, Dad was wrong, we need to not follow him so much. And I think you're right, that story itself is really interesting, but it also leads to so much distrust and so much, and so it makes, I think, the story of this found family feel so much more significant. I also think it's very interesting, given some of the other conversations we're having, because this whole concept of found family, I mean, I think it's important for anybody who feels, distant from their family or anything, but in particular, it has so much significance, and I think the term comes from, communities that often were, not only distant from their family physically, but no longer in contact with their family or estranged from their family, often because of their sexuality or their gender or their politics or their religion or anything like that. And I think that's why a lot of the fan base felt, I know certainly I have felt a real connection to, and I have a decent relationship with my parents now, but I've certainly felt a strong connection to that found family because found family has been so important to me. And I know just in sort of reading a lot of the stuff from the fans about this show, that was one thing that came up a lot, was that for people who felt like, I am estranged from my own family, and I'm really honored and blessed by the found family I've found. Let me see if I can not use the word found anymore in the sentence.
I think you should keep. I think it sounds great. Add a couple more. Like it's
that
cute.
Watching the found family that the Winchesters found in their process of finding a new family helped people really connect to the show for others who had found family in that important way.
I found that very compelling.
Yeah, I'm finding myself agreeing with you fondly over these.
As my listener numbers go down steadily. Unsubscribe, someone else unsubscribed, someone else unsubscribed. I just need
You're
to
not too fond of us.
You all will have to help me find new listeners. Anyway,
Nope.
That horse is now very dead. We have beaten it to death. We can move on. Let's get back to this idea of free will and determination, because this is something I'm always so fascinated by, is the more you have supernatural or deities pulling the pieces around the chessboard, the more you start wondering, well, why do I care as I watch these characters agonize over their decisions? Because they have no agency. The decisions aren't even made. What was your take, both of you, on how this show resolved that tension of, to what extent the Winchesters did or did not have actual agency?
I had a real hard time when they brought the angels in, and when they started bringing God and all that stuff into it a little bit more, because I think the whole premise in the beginning was God was missing. Right, Jacob?
Correct.
Yeah.
That is correct.
And then it just seemed like, when Cass first came, I was like, this is great. He's super powerful. He can get them out of like all these problems. And then, of course, you have to take that power away from him because then it gets too easy. But then, it's, you have literal angels. Like we're talking Michael, and then you're bringing up Lucifer. And I'm like, they don't stand a chance. They get beat up on the average by, regular demons. And here they are with these angels. It took me a long time to get on board with the angel stuff.
I kind of was into it from the start, but my interpretation of angels in fiction tends to assume the Shin Megami Tensei series of angels. It's a series of games, for those who aren't aware, where the people on the quote good / light / angelic side of things aren't your beyond reproach beings, but are more just about controlling you and basically enforcing the ideas of determinism and order, and they're the Vorlons, Matthew, to shortcut for you.
Yeah.
And
like
that,
the Greek gods and like the Iliad, is that what you mean?
yeah, like that.
Vorlons is a reference to Babylon 5, but yes, it's a similar kind of idea.
Yes. So for me, when Angels came in, I was like, really? For maybe an episode or two, and then as soon as I found out that the Angels were clearly not always going to be on the side of our heroes, I went, okay, cool, I'm in. Because if you just had this army of very powerful beings on the side of quote right or whatever, then that it's hard to sell our heroes ever being in danger.
I agree.
Right. So I kind of dug it, but I was primed by other media to be into it.
Right.
I just loved what they had done, like, in the first couple seasons so much that, you know, it was hard for me. Like, I feel like when the Angels came in, they kind of stopped using as much of the rock music. It went over to, it felt like the show changed. Yeah. And I had to, like, you know, put on my big girl pants and be like, all right, fine, I can deal with change.
From what I saw, it definitely felt like that was the moment at which it stopped being the X-Files type show. It stopped being about investigating folklore and much more about this larger cosmological battle between the forces of good and evil.
It had good sides and bad sides. There was a time in the middle where it kind of got back to a couple of the, you know, urban legends type things, or dealing with ostensibly based in Christian mythos stuff. But once the Angels came in, I have to agree with you here, Ashley, is that the tone of the show and the central plot arcs were centered basically entirely around these big cosmological conflicts. And that, when we got to getting to the free will versus determinism idea, when you get to the last season and your villain is literally God, who is apparently been manipulating and trying to tell this story using our actors as puppets or as actors, like it gets tough to be all like, well, okay, what agency did our heroes ever really have?
Right.
They tread a line during the season, I think, with showing examples where Chuck, who is God, Chuck wants the Winchesters to do a certain thing, and they just don't quite do it. And it's because they made a different choice that he didn't want them to make, and he gets very frustrated and pissy about it. They do that enough to try to sort of have that, I forget, there's a term for it in philosophy about this sort of marriage between free will and determinism, this idea that there's a mixture of both. And I don't, like, it's been way too long since I took a philosophy class. I don't remember the term. I think it started with a C, with a letter C, but I'm not coming up with it. But they're trying to have that, and that never really worked for me. But ultimately, the conflict of the last season is about sort of taking their whole free will back. It's Dean's central conflict for sure. He cannot stand the idea that any of his decisions weren't his. Right. There's a really cool moment in one of the later episodes in the season where Chuck is trying to have a scenario play out a particular way, because he's wanted this whole time, to be clear, is he's wanted the Winchester brothers to kill one of the Winchester brothers to kill the other. He wants his Cain and Abel story again, like a redo. Cain and Abel 3, Return to Cain, or something.
Yeah, Dean was Cain for a little while.
Correct. He had the mark of Cain, which is basically, right. That gets into the show-specific mythos, but Dean was supposed to kill his brother Sam, is the story that Chuck wants. And once again, they're right there, they're at the moment, and Chuck's all like, I've got him, it's going to happen this time. And there's this moment where it doesn't happen, and it's very clear because that a choice is being made by Dean to lower the gun, to not do it. And it's very powerful because it does demonstrate that, at least in the show's universe, free will always exists in some form, but it might be more difficult to exercise.
Right.
But that's also, galvanizes Dean's whole thing of, like, he thought he was making all of those choices himself, and he wasn't. He was being led in a particular direction, manipulated in that direction. And it makes him go kind of off the rails for a bit, because that's sort of counter to his whole character. Whereas Sam, I feel like, had been more accepting of, like, well, what can we do? Like, he's just gonna, which obviously that approach doesn't win the day, right? So you need a little bit of the fire that Dean had to be like, no, you just got to say, no, I won't one more time, then they'll say, yes, you will. And I think, is a line I'm 100% stealing from somewhere that I don't remember.
And I love this because I think this is such an interesting question and an interesting way to kind of resolve this. The philosophical school you're talking about, Jacob, is compatibilism.
That's the one.
And it's about this idea of them being compatible. And because I think one of the things that, for me, this has been such an interesting question, and I think it's going to sound a weird tangent, but it's very connected to me. To me, it's very connected to why I have such negative feelings about time travel stories. Because often in time travel, once you start to get to an idea of, like, this is the way time is supposed to be, then you start to get a question of, like, well, is there any determinism? Is it all just deterministic? Is it all just pre-decided? I recently did a time travel episode on superhero ethics with Rob McKenzie, a friend of Jacob's and mine, who's been a great constant guest. And he actually made an argument that Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, the first Bill and Ted movie, is a perfectly written, perfectly logical time travel story, in part because the characters have absolutely no free will whatsoever. Everything has been predetermined. It is completely on rails. There is no such thing as Bill and Ted making a decision because it's all been decided already. And what I like about what you're talking about for this is that it does seem to have that kind of a find the middle ground idea, in part because I think when we see those two things as very binary, there's an idea of either it is, I am making this decision, versus, a writer is literally saying, and then Dean decided to put the gun down. And so the entity that is Dean doesn't get to make the decision, someone makes the decision for him. But I think where it gets really interesting is when you start saying, okay, well, does Dean make this decision, or does all the feelings that Dean has because of the way his father treated him cause him to make that decision? Does all these other factors, and I think that's where you can get into some of this interesting middle ground of Dean still gets to exist as an entity, but that all these other forces, whether they're supernatural or just psychological, are playing a role and sort of pushing him to make the decisions that he makes.
And you could definitely make an argument that Chuck's sort of a proxy for the show's own writers, because the character they were writing runs away from them in that they try to build to a particular decision, and then the character Dean swerves away from Chuck because all of the stuff that Chuck has written up to that point actually influences them in that direction, which is really funny and is kind of again, not sure that was intended, but that could be seen, like, the whole last season could be seen as the writers sort of having their own catharsis about, we started changing the show, and wrote ourselves into corners in certain situations because there's no other way the character should go than this, even though we want to do something else.
Didn't they double down, and then Chuck had his own book too with his own ending in it that he didn't know and only Death could read?
That's his death book, yeah.
Okay.
And that was also an interesting thing about the cosmology that they didn't really go as much into. There's a scene where where the Winchester boys are talking with Death, and Death's all like, yeah, someday I'll reap God too. And they're all like, what? You'll do what now? And there's always this implication that the Reapers are somehow outside of the creation, for lack of a better way of putting it, which is fascinating. But yeah, Death has a book for how everybody's story ends, basically. And God was one of them. Chuck was one in the library or whatever.
I mean, if I was a bunch of writers, I think creating a story in which writers get to determine the absolute basis of reality based on what they write, that sounds like a kind of fun thing to write to, aggrandize my own profession. It's
been done. It's been done better, frankly. It's not bad in Supernatural, but it's camp. by the time they get there, and it leans into it. Now, if you're getting into camp anyway, you might as well lean into it.
Speaking of camp, in that last episode, I really didn't appreciate the fact that Sam got that call telling him to come to Austin. Because, that's setting up his new TV show. Like, I'm supposed to think that Sam moved to Austin, became Walker, Texas Ranger. Get your meta BS out of here with that. And Ken had just made the joke about it like 10 minutes before. He's like, what if he moves to Texas and becomes, Walker, Texas Ranger? And then they actually did it.
Wait, they specifically mentioned that show, Walker, Texas Ranger?
No. So there's a new show premiering on the CW that is a reboot of Walker, Texas Ranger, starring Jared Padalecki as Walker, Texas Ranger, rather than Chuck Norris.
Oh, God.
And there's there's a line where he gets a call to go to Austin, Texas. I think I'm interested to watch the first couple of episodes and see how long that show goes. Where you could reasonably interpret that this is actually Sam Winchester trying to live a second life.
I know. I thought the same thing. I was like, no, they're not going to try to do that.
I mean, I'm pretty sure... I admit, I did not see Walker, Texas Ranger, but I'm pretty sure it did not have any supernatural elements to it.
Well, it had Chuck Norris in it. So...
Also true. And am I correct that it's been... I mean, obviously the writer's room, I'm sure, has changed a lot, but that the same core writers have been there for all 15 seasons?
Yeah, Eric Kripke has been the showrunner the whole way through.
That's impressive.
And there's also
Robert Singer, right?
Robert Singer. I was going to say Bobby Singer, but that's the
that's
character.
Right, though.
Yes.
Right. Still right.
Yeah. Robert Singer, whom Bobby Singer's namesake has been on the show since the beginning.
Right.
There we go. There's some way to vocalize this. But their core writing team, I think, has had some changes over time as they've gotten some Buffy writers over the years, and it's been very clear.
Okay,
in good ways, I think. Like, there's a lot of overlap in the kind of storytelling, especially when it gets to the campier seasons, where it feels a little more Buffy the Vampire Slayer and a little less horror, like almost horror show where they started.
That episode where they did them, like they were playing themselves on the movie set and going through, or on the TV set and going, like, that is one of my favorite episodes.
Yep.
What kind of name is Misha? Ugh.
Yeah, they literally had Eric Kripke get killed by the big bad of the episode. Oh yeah,
it was awesome.
So good.
Their wives are in it.
Yep.
Given that we've gone 15 seasons of the show, it seems appropriate that the episode about the show goes on a good long time. But I do want to not try and go quite as long. If nothing else, there's a Mandalorian episode I haven't watched yet, and that needs to be fixed. But I know so the one last point I wanted us to talk about was this idea of of prioritizing self over others. That's obviously been a big topic in the show the whole time. For you all both, what do you think of how that question was discussed and how it was resolved in the show?
I think each one of the main characters, Dean, Sam, and Castiel, gave their lives multiple times to save one of the main, one of those main three characters. So I do see, I think they prioritize each other, like Sam and Dean prioritize each other over any of the other characters there. But when it comes down to the three of them, they're so willing to not throw away, but to give up their lives to save the others. It's kind of it's a very back and forth kind of thing, I think.
Yeah, 100% agree. The thing about this is, while it is noble, in principle, to be willing to sacrifice yourself so that someone else may live, the degree to which, the frequency with which these characters do it, Sam and Dean specifically, has to be unhealthy. Right? I mean, like, it literally is unhealthy because they keep dying, right? But
I like the way you talk. You put it out there exactly how yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I try. But there's a point where, they're fighting these more grander and grander cosmological forces that are, going to end the world in the later seasons, right? Like, big deal things, and like sacrificing yourself to save the world is fine. But they're just so, as you said, Ashley, so willing to do it that I gotta wonder if that's really if that's really mentally healthy. And I do think the show actually leans into that a bit about sort of showcasing that this is an unhealthy behavior, because they also call each other on it, saying you can't do that. Like at one point, Sam's saying to Dean, "We were supposed to let me die. You were supposed to let that be it. Why?
Yeah,
we can't keep doing this."
I mean,
right? And it's because Dean made a contract and is going to be like taken to hell in a year or something.
Oh,
and
yeah.
just back and forth,
the
right?
Hellhounds.
Yep, with the Hellhounds. God, this show went on forever.
This is a common trope, but I'm fairly certain I've seen a meme where someone took the actual page of the dictionary where the term codependency is listed and just pasted a picture of the two of them.
Yep.
And certainly that was something I got even just in the 4 seasons I watched, but also in everything else I've read about it, is that to me, I think one of the things that I often think of when I think of codependency, or about this idea of prioritizing self over others and not doing that in unhealthy ways, is when it starts to not be, it's not just, I love my brother or I love my friend or my spouse and I want them to exist, but it becomes, I can't exist without them. Mm-hmm. And that certainly seemed to be a big part of the time you're mentioning there with Dean and Sam, was that one of them was content. I think it was Dean, was content with having died, but that the other one, and again, I might be mixing up which one it was more in a place of like, I know that you want to stay dead, but I need you alive. I need you
They both
here.
did it.
It's happened, yes. It's happened with both of them, and both of them have literally uttered exactly that line of, I don't know how to go on without you.
Right.
And that's
Who
part
does,
of
though?
what...
Doesn't Dean for a minute does, and then Sam comes back, he's like, you didn't come for me. I can't remember.
Oh,
Maybe
right. There is
around.
also a time where Sam comes back on his own and is pissed at Dean for not having... It's like, come on.
You told me to, and I finally did it. I was like, fine, I'm never going to let you not die again.
Right. And this is actually part of why the end, the way Dean comes to an end, I think is so poignant, because it's a moment where Sam actually lets go of his codependency on his brother, because he does not choose to take the, as Ashley pointed out earlier, many canonical options available to him for making Dean not be dead.
Right.
Right? And instead just chooses to continue with his life and just carry the weight of missing his brother as he lives a apparently very long, rich life where he couldn't. Okay, I really would have liked to have not seen his son have the tattoo.
Yeah.
I know why it's there. It's there to tell us that his son became a hunter, but maybe it was time for the Winchester cycle to be broken, and maybe let's not introduce someone else into this very not everyone has to save the world, okay?
Maybe we can look at it as, he told his son to get it, didn't really explain what it was. The kid was never a hunter, and it was just a way to protect him on the DL and have a matching tattoo with Dad.
I can see that.
Yeah, but Sam's is over his heart.
Right.
It's much more badass.
Yeah, he's like...
I mean, given that Sam was the one who most objected to following in his father's footsteps, and this idea that he had to be a hunter because his dad was, it does feel like it both is the choice to have then Sam's son become a hunter is, on the one hand, I can see it being very disappointing, and like Sam wasn't able to break free. You could also see it from the other direction of, Sam has come to terms with being what his father wanted, and that he is now okay repeating that cycle again. Either way, this may well be 100% headcanon, given that Sam was the one who most strayed from his father's path. The idea that the wayward son is the one carrying on is...
Yeah.
I like that idea. It might be headcanon, but I managed a way to get it into the episode, but I do think that works, in a way that I
wasn't
really like.
peace when he was gone, though. The fight went on.
Yeah.
He did lay his weary head to rest.
And right out of my mouth.
Cried his last tear.
Uh-huh.
Wait, 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Oh, God. I think,
that's good.
legit, the soundtrack for the show is part of what hooked me in the beginning, and I really wish they had, in the last season, they brought back a lot more of the classic rock / quote mullet rock unquote, and I was like, why couldn't you have just been doing this for all 15 seasons? There's enough. But
maybe they
that pulled on the nostalgia strings for me and made me go, man, I remember when they used to use good songs.
Like the Reapers, and they would use Don't Fear the Reapers. I love that.
Yeah, the first time a Reaper showed up, and it was a big deal.
That wasn't Darla from Buffy was in that episode, too. That episode was so good.
Yeah. They used, in the first season, they actually used a lot of Buffy / Angel alums. A surprising number of them. And then they were sprinkled throughout. And that was before they had a bunch of Buffy writers, too. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Chicken and egg situation, I think.
It was the WB back then.
Yes, they were on the WB rather than the CW.
So 90 minutes is now well in the rearview mirror of our cars. We're driving down this highway. So I want to start wrapping up. Do either of you have kind of final thoughts or ideas that didn't get discussed enough, or one more way you want to say that one of the other two of us is totally wrong, or anything like that?
I have everything crossed off my list. I think that was great.
Yeah. I think I made every point I wanted to make, and some that I didn't realize until we started talking that I wanted to make. Just sort of a wrapping up thought. Supernatural's not a perfect show, right? There are a lot of problems that it had over its run. I love the show to pieces, and will most likely someday actually complete a rewatch and try to zero in on, can I pinpoint where things got off track and got back on, etc., because I love the property enough to do that. But I think it is important to be critical of even the media we very much enjoy. And in the case of Supernatural, as we've pointed out here, there's a lot to be critical of. In general, though, I think that if they had been able to film with more people for the finale, it would have been better. It is not their fault they couldn't do that. I personally would have preferred they wait until they could to give us a finale where they could bring back, give us another scene with Ruth Connell, give us another scene with, I can't remember Jodie's actress's name for the life of me, but let us see those characters one last time on your victory lap, because they had a whole episode that was a victory lap.
Right.
But it's there, it's done, and I'm glad that they actually, as I said earlier, I'm glad they actually chose to end it. And I come out of this thinking that I appreciate that catharsis in these times more than I would have appreciated, them going out in a blaze of glory, or having the scene from the end of Angel where it's, let's go to work, and then one of them swings an axe and then it cuts to black and that's the end of the show. I appreciate the ending wasn't ending. Yeah.
I kind of feel like they'd always kind of told us that Dean would die and that Sam would be the one that goes on. Even though I was expecting it, I still cried like a little girl. And I don't cry that much. When he's like, don't move me. I'm like, no, they're going to do it. Please don't do it. And you're just waiting for someone to come. And then he starts burning them, even though for some reason they couldn't use real fire. They had to go with CGI, but whatever. And you're like, this is final. Like, this is done. He had nobody there. None of the other people who were still alive to even have a funeral for him. It was just really quick, overdone, final.
Right.
And I don't know.
That's the other thing, is I feel like if they had the opportunity to have the other actors present, that scene would have been that scene would have had a lot of faces we recognized, right? And it would have been a really nice symbolic, yes, this whole thing all of us have been a part of is ending. It would have been better, and I don't think you can fault them for sticking to their schedule, but it is unfortunate that the situation we find ourselves in meant they couldn't have everyone around to have the finale I feel like the show really deserved.
I can understand that. And certainly I've mentioned I'm going to be watching Mandalorian soon. I think this new season has had some trouble that I think similarly could be traced in part to what's happening with the pandemic and the need to do everything on green screens with smaller number of actors and the like. Interesting that this show will then have we've had two major disruptions to society that have affected television, the writer's strike and this one. And Ashley kept pointing out the way the writer's strike had affected. I can't think of any other TV show that will have been hit by both. So that's an interesting legacy in and of itself.
I think this is the only one. Yeah.
But,
wow.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, right.
I mean, whatever else, 15 years was.
That's how long it's been. Yeah, we've gotten to see them like literally, grow up. It's just crazy. Well, we grew up, and I'm glad that they still made the show enjoyable for us, like in our late 30s and 40s, as much as when I was 21. Right,
and like we aged with the Winchesters. Like I continue to be, I think, as old as Jared Padalecki. It's unreal.
I mean, if that stopped, it would be a much more concerning situation.
Oh, yeah, I mean.
Well, you know what I mean.
But yeah, I saw a picture of them at the end of season 15 and them on like the first episode. It just hit me how much they've aged. So.
They were such babies.
Little babies.
Yeah.
Little babies.
So,
and
go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that, like, props to them for not only like landing the gigs and being able to carry the show for that long, but like doing things like saying, hey, we're willing to do these last 3 seasons or whatever, but can we trim the number of episodes down by some so we could spend more time with our families? They did things like that, and that's really cool.
Yeah. 27 episodes was too much. The 18's even a little bit much, but
yeah, that all makes sense.
Anyway, you're trying to wrap up, Matthew. So.
I am. I do want to actually get a little bit of leftover turkey and stuffing in before our next set of podcasting. But thank you both. You managed to do 2 incredible things, which is one, I mean, just share such great insights that both of you have, not always on the same page, which is wonderful about this show, but you've also managed to help this discussion be one where someone, and this I hope for many of the fans, who hasn't seen it all, could keep up, understood what you were talking about, and really understand that, like, the larger issues that this show raises. And clearly there's a lot going on here, both in terms of everything from theology and cosmology to free will to fathers and sons to determination to, issues also outside the larger show in terms of queer baiting and what responsibility writers do and don't have to their fans and fan theories and all this kind of stuff. So thank you so much for this great discussion. To our fans, would love to hear what you think. What's your take on Dean Castiel? What's your take on this final season and how it wrapped up the god of it all and the different stories that we had? Were you someone who stuck through it for 15 years? Did you pop in for a couple seasons? Now maybe this wants to make you go back, or have we reminded you of all the reasons why you're so happy you quit after season 9 or whatever it might be? Let us know. Superhero Ethics, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, or superheroethics@gmail.com. But the best way to go and find us is by going to strandedpanda.com and clicking on Superhero Ethics. There you'll find all the great stuff about what we're doing. You'll also find information about all the other great podcasts happening on Stranded Panda. My own podcast as well there, the Star Wars Universe podcast. We're about to do, as I mentioned, the next episode of Mandalorian. Those have been dropping hopefully every Friday. Often they don't come out till Sunday or Monday, depending on recording. But we're talking about that. Also, other great podcasts on that network include stuff about the MCU, stuff about the DC Universe, Star Trek Universe, as well as PandaVision and Bingers Assemble, where we've been doing lots of great things about more standalone things, such as The Boys, Lovecraft Country, Umbrella Academy, and there especially you can hear a lot of Ashley's great insights and thoughts, as she's been a frequent guest and co-host, and has recently actually put out her own episode all about the horror movies of Sam Raimi. So thank you to both of you. Thank you to all of our fans. Have a great day.
Carry on.
My wayward son.
You will always remember.
No, yep, we're done. Okay. No lawsuit.